Few images are more haunting in Roman history than the fate that befell Cicero. His decapitated head and severed hands, stained with blood, were mercilessly nailed to the rostra, the very platform where he once stood tall as the champion of the Republic. The crowd that gathered was paralyzed by horror. The voice that had decried Mark Antony as a tyrant was now silenced not by debate but by the sword. This grotesque display was more than mere execution. It was a ritual humiliation. Every nail driven into wood served as a stark reminder of Antony's triumph. Every drop of blood symbolized Cicero's crushing defeat. After 2 years of festering fury, Mark Antony had taken his revenge, and he intended for Rome to witness the butchery of philosophy and freedom alongside their fallen champion. So how did Rome's most celebrated intellectual, a man whose words could sway the Senate and rally the populace, meet such a gruesome and public end? This story is not merely a tale of betrayal. It's one of a war of words that pushed one of Rome's most powerful men to his breaking point. This is the story of a humiliation so profound that it could only be answered with violence, a tale of how Mark Antony waited more than a year to unleash a terrifying and symbolic retribution on his greatest rival. Our story begins in the chaos that followed the Ides of March in 44 BC. Julius Caesar, the dictator for life, lay cold-stabbed 23 times by the senators who considered themselves liberators. They believed they had saved the Roman Republic from tyranny, yet they had plunged it into a catastrophic power vacuum. Out of this chaos, 2 men quickly emerged as key players. The first was Marcus Tullius Cicero, the intellectual heart of the Republican cause. Though not among the assassins, Cicero seized the moment, believing that Caesar's death presented a golden opportunity to restore the old republic, free from the clutches of military strongmen. The second man was Mark Antony, a charismatic, battle-hardened general who had served as Caesar's trusted right-hand man and co-consul. A man of action rather than philosophical rhetoric, Antony saw the liberators not as saviors, but as traitors who had murdered his friend. While Cicero held the respect of the Senate, Antony commanded the loyalty of Caesar's soldiers and had captured the public's affection, especially after his passionate and fiery eulogy for Caesar turned the masses against the assassins, forcing them to flee Rome. For a brief and tense period, a fragile peace was achieved. Surprisingly, Antony attempted to play nice, even backing a legislation aimed at abolishing the office of dictator forever. It seemed as though he and Cicero, leader of the Senate, might find a way to collaborate. But this was merely the calm before the storm. Their visions for Rome were fundamentally incompatible. Cicero longed for a republic governed by law and Senate authority, while Antony, a product of Caesar's mentorship, believed in the power of individual might backed by a loyal army. This uneasy truce was built upon total distrust. Antony dismissed Cicero as a pompous academic, while Cicero viewed Antony as a reckless, drunken, brutal, nascent tyrant poised to replace Caesar. The hatred was mutual, and it was only a matter of time before one of them made a move. That move didn't come with a sword, but with Cicero's most potent weapon, his voice. By autumn 44 BC, Cicero concluded that diplomacy had reached its limit. He believed Antony was seizing power and misappropriating Caesar's legacy for his own gain. On September 2nd, he took to the Senate floor and delivered a scathing speech, the first in a relentless series of 14 attacks known as the Philippics. The title itself was a historical jab, evoking the speeches of the great Athenian orator Demosthenes, who had cautioned against the tyranny of Philip II of Macedon centuries earlier. By labeling his speeches the Philippics, Cicero positioned himself as the defender of liberty while casting Antony as a foreign despot, an enemy at the gates. These speeches became masterclasses in character assassination. Cicero didn't merely criticize Antony's policies. He dismantled the man entirely. He depicted Antony as a degenerate, a public drunk, a womanizer, and a coward. The second Philippic was so vicious that Cicero chose not to deliver it in person, publishing it instead as a pamphlet. In it, he chronicled Antony's life as a tale of failure and corruption, accusing him of everything from crippling debts to scandalous affairs, all to demonstrate that he posed a threat to the Roman state. One blistering line declared, "What is there in Antonius but lust, cruelty, insolence, audacity? He is wholly comprised of these vices. Cicero's words spread throughout Rome like wildfire, causing real damage. They turned the Senate against Antony, successfully branding him an enemy of the state. Public opinion began to sour. While Cicero aligned himself with a new player on the scene, Caesar's young, ambitious adopted son, Octavian. Cicero believed he could use Octavian as a tool to crush Antony, only to push him aside later. This would prove to be a fatal miscalculation. Weakened by Cicero's verbal onslaught, Antony was declared a public enemy and forced out of Rome. He retreated north to take command of a province and its army, but he faced a devastating defeat at the Battle of Mutina in 43 BC. For a fleeting moment, it appeared as though Cicero had prevailed. But the old orator profoundly underestimated Antony's resolve and, more importantly, his capacity for vengeance. As Antony retreated over the Alps, his humiliation festered. He was biding his time, waiting for the right moment to strike back. Just over a year later, that moment would come. The political landscape of Rome was shifting rapidly. Cicero's plans involving Octavian backfired spectacularly. Following victory at Mutina, the two consuls leading the army were killed, leaving 19-year-old Octavian in sole command. Feeling slighted by the Senate, which had denied him the accolades he demanded, Octavian took the extraordinary step of marching his army on Rome, seizing the treasury and declaring himself consul. In November of 43 BC, Octavian met with Mark Antony and another one of Caesar's generals, Lepidus. On a small island in a river, the three most powerful men in Rome set aside their rivalries and formed the Second Triumvirate. This was not just a friendly pact. It was a legal 5-year military dictatorship, granting them the authority to legislate, appoint officials, and most chillingly, condemn their enemies to death without trial. Their first course of action? Settle old scores and raise funds. They revived one of the Republic's most horrific traditions, prescriptions. Death lists were drawn up and posted in the forum. Anyone named on these lists became an outlaw, their property seized, and a hefty reward was issued for their heads. It was a state-sanctioned bloodbath designed to eliminate opposition and finance their impending war against Caesar's assassins, Brutus and Cassius. Ancient sources suggest that around 300 senators and 2,000 wealthy equestrians were marked for death. The triumvirs callously traded in the lives of friends and family. Lepidus sacrificed his own brother. Antony approved the execution of his uncle, and Octavian, who once admired Cicero, chose to do away with the great orator. For 2 days, Octavian reportedly argued to spare Cicero's life, but Antony remained resolute. The humiliation of the Philippics was a wound that never healed. Antony didn't just want Cicero dead. He insisted his name be at the very top of the list. The voice that had driven him from Rome and portrayed him as a tyrant would be the first to fall. For Antony, this was not merely a political maneuver. It was personal. The hunt for Marcus Tullius Cicero was on. When Cicero, then 63, learned of the prescriptions, he knew his time was running out. At his villa near Tusculum, he initially attempted to escape. His brother Quintus, also on the list, returned to Rome for funds but was swiftly caught and executed. Cicero fled south, hoping to find a ship to Macedonia, but his escape was plagued by indecision and a growing sense of despair. Exhausted and weary from running, he lamented, "I will die in the country I have often saved," according to historian Plutarch. He briefly boarded a ship, but rough seas made him ill, and he disembarked at his coastal villa in Formia, seemingly resigned to his fate. It wasn't long before the death squad found him. The team was led by a centurion named Herennius, and a military tribune named Popilius, a man Cicero had previously defended in court against a murder charge. Cicero's loyal servants wished to fight, but he forbade them. As he heard the soldiers approach, he ordered his litter to be set down. The final moments are recorded by several historians. Cicero, frail and exhausted, leaned his head out of the litter and stroked his chin, offering his neck to the soldiers. His last words were reportedly, "There is nothing proper about what you are doing, soldier, but try to kill me properly." Herennius swung his sword with poor aim. It supposedly took 3 clumsy hacks to sever the old statesman's head. But Antony's directives were chillingly specific. Death alone wasn't sufficient. The instruments of his humiliation had to be obliterated. The soldiers also chopped off both of his hands, the very hands that had penned the 14 brutal speeches against Antony. Cicero's severed head and hands were brought back to Rome. Antony was present in the forum when the soldiers arrived, proudly displaying their gruesome trophies. The historian Appian reports that Antony was overjoyed, laughing and rewarding the assassins generously. Then came the final act of symbolic vengeance. At Antony's behest, Cicero's head and hands were nailed to the rostra, the very podium where he had passionately defended the Republic time and again. Now, his silenced head and lifeless hands were put on display as a horrifying warning to anyone who dared to oppose authority. The message was unmistakable. The voice of the Republic was dead. The historian Cassius Dio provides a chilling final detail. Antony's wife, Fulvia, held her own grudges against Cicero, stemming from her animosity toward his previous attacks on her first husband. Dio recounts that Fulvia took Cicero's severed head, spat on it, and viciously stabbed it with her hairpins, a final act of spite against the man whose greatest weapon had been his eloquence. The story of Cicero and Antony is a stark reminder of how deeply personal feuds can dramatically alter the course of history. The clash between the ultimate statesman and the ultimate soldier culminated in a brutal spectacle that signaled the death of free speech in Rome. If you find these power struggles as fascinating as we do, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon for more deep dives into ancient history. Let us know in the comments, whose side are you on, Cicero, the defender of the Republic, or Antony, the avenging general? Mark Antony got his revenge. He silenced his sharpest critic in the most public and humiliating manner possible, nailing Cicero's head and hands to the rostra. He wasn't merely killing a man. He was effectively extinguishing an idea. He declared that the age of debate and republican ideals was over, replaced by the raw power of the sword. In the short term, Antony triumphed. He and the triumvirs went on to defeat Brutus and Cassius a year later, sealing the fate of the Republic. But history possesses a long memory. Antony's victory was not to last. He would eventually fall to Octavian and meet his own end. Cicero's legacy, however, endured. You can sever a head and nail hands to a post, but you cannot erase the written word. Cicero's speeches and writings survived the fall of the Republic and the man who ordered his murder. They continued to influence thinkers for over 2,000 years, shaping the foundations of Western political thought and even impacting the founding fathers of the United States. In the end, while Antony won the battle for his life, Cicero ultimately won the war for history. Though remembered as a great general, Antony remains a tragic figure on the wrong side of that history. Cicero, despite his flaws, is immortalized as a martyr for liberty, a man who, as he penned in his final Philippic, understood that while a person's life may be short, the memory of a life nobly lived is everlasting. Though his mutilated body stood as a symbol of Antony's power, his words became a lasting testament to the Republic he valiantly fought to save.